Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. This is Officer Cervantes, and today's Chief's meet availability is for September 14th, 2021. Chief, you may begin.
All right, well, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I made some remarks earlier today about the release of the final ATF report, as well as our after-action report. It's now been posted online for a number of hours. So rather than reframing that, we are going to have a 1700, 5 o'clock p.m. tonight Zoom call, town hall meeting that's open to everyone, in which we'll go through the high-level review led by Mike Hoffman from the ATF on their report, and then I'll go through our findings, our critique on the LAPD after-action report. It'll largely mirror what was covered last night with the immediate family and business owners that were from the impacted community that we held at that meeting. So members of the media are welcome to that event as well. And what I'll do is at this point, for the sake of time and determining your interest, I'll let you guys raise questions, raise hands and raise questions.
Thank you, Chief. Stephanie, you may ask your question.
Thanks so much. Once again, thanks for taking the time, Chief. I need to pivot to the vaccine mandate and what my colleagues at the LA Times reported today. What percentage of those seeking exemptions are sworn officers, and what percentage of sworn officers are fully vaccinated? And what are your thoughts on so many frontline workers who are coming into contact with the public every day who are refusing to get vaccinated? And do you really believe that you have so many people who are devoutly religious claiming that exemption? And what plans do you have to verify religion and how devout someone is? Thank you.
Okay, so let me handle this a couple different, you had like 6 questions, I think, in there. So forgive me, Stephanie, let me try to work through this.
Sure, thanks.
As to today, I received a report midday that each city department manager obtained, which identified the number of department personnel that filed a notice or intent to express a exemption from the vaccination on either a religious or medical basis. The religious number, I believe, was 2,660. That number approximately, and the medical exemption was just over 300. So in total, about 3,000. What I don't have today for you is a breakdown between sworn members of the department and the professional or civilian class of the organization. In regards to the vaccination of personnel within the organization, we have a total of, as I reported this morning, 6,573 of our personnel that have received at least one dose. 54%, 50.3% have received that one dose as a percentage of the total organization. I'll have to look at our workforce to give you the breakdown between the sworn and civilian members. I don't have that in front of me, but I'll ask Captain Spell to follow up with you on the number of sworn personnel that have received at least one vaccination, those that are fully vaccinated, and their makeup. The next point was those that have expressed an intent to file an exemption on the basis of a sincerely held religious belief. I can't and won't comment on the sincerity level or otherwise. I'm looking for guidance from the personnel department. We've yet to understand how the interpretation of that sincerely held religious belief will be done. Who will be the authority responsible for evaluating these exemption requests and determining the validity of them and what that standard will look like. So I don't want to speculate. Religion in America has many different definitions and many different authorities that declare many different forms. So I'm not that authority, and so I'll wait for further guidance. I do believe that what's critical and what's important is that these exemptions, whether they're medical or on the basis of a sincerely held religious belief, that as a city we should act with one voice, one defining standard, and a review process that is fair and consistent across all departments. And I certainly will adhere to that standard as well. And Lastly, the criticality of this vaccine for the safety of all of our personnel is, in my view, readily apparent. The medical research on this, what is available to demonstrate the effectiveness of the vaccine can be seen when we look at hospitalizations. It can be seen when we look at the instances of mortality or death by this virus. And while we see some crossover, meaning that some people who have been vaccinated have been reinfected with COVID, as we've seen people who were not vaccinated earlier and suffered from a bout of COVID to experience a second or third bout. I'm aware of at least one fatality where that occurred. And so I do believe that the vaccination, myself led from the front, taking it as did President of the Los Angeles Police Protective League, Craig Lally, and half our organization sees the utility of it. And we're welcoming and encouraging in this ordinance and the requirements that are quickly approaching is going to make it part of a job requirement moving forward.
Thank you, Chief. Our next question will be from Mr. Joshua Kane. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for taking our questions, Chief. So going back to the ATF report and the your guys' after action report on the 27th Street explosion, are any of those bomb technicians who were involved in the response and the mistakes that were made on the ground, are they going to be disciplined? Could they be fired or reassigned potentially? What is going to happen to those technicians? Well,
the individuals that were directly related to preparing the material that was being destroyed, the illegal fireworks, the countercharge, and the safety officer, the person charged with reviewing and affirming provisions of protocols and processes that were being employed. They've been, from day one of this, they were removed from the field and have not returned, and it's not my intention to have them return to their previous duties. Everyone within the bomb squad was, in the immediate aftermath of this, was also sent and we organized for training and retraining and recertification, if you will, to ensure that people were qualified to do this very technical and dangerous work to ensure that we would not have any type of failure moving forward. In addition to that, over the last 8 weeks, we've been working diligently, 10 weeks, so we've been working diligently to strengthen protocols, to increase the level of documentation and oversight, as well as notification. And at the end of this, there will be accountability for those that in making these mistakes saw this level of calamity. And yet with that, I will wait for the full investigation. And while we have these two investigations, the after action report and the ATF report, now we have our personnel complaint investigation that will build from these further. And then that will be what's called an adjudication, where we'll review the totality of it as to the allegations of misconduct, where their negligence or their mistakes resulted in this. And then it'll be my decision as to what discipline to provide and the severity of that. This is an area that I don't mean to hide the ball or avoid public discussion, but it is also an area that by California state law, the officers, all personnel involved, enjoy substantial privacy rights. And I will ensure that I honor that law and that confidentiality. And so there'll be a limit to what I can ultimately say. At the end of the day, I'll be able to discuss whether or not discipline was or wasn't imposed, but I'll be preempted by discussing the severity of that discipline.
Understood. Do you know quickly? Do you know the just quickly? Do you know the timeline of that? Like, how long do those typically take?
Well, this investigation, I've asked for it to move forward judiciously. I don't see this being the bulk of this work. I believe is done, and so now we have some additional matters, administrative investigation, and then the review of it will go through a chain of command and ultimately be presented to me for my final decision. And I would hope that we would have that done as an estimation the next 60 to 75 days.
Thank you. If I can follow up with one more question, I was curious from the report and from your comments this morning in talking about, the use of the TCV as a regular, in many ways it seemed like the go-to option for the bomb squad, just going off of, what you said. And I guess I'm wondering if you have any sense for why that became the go-to. You mentioned that other police agencies don't use their TCVs as a regular item that they use for these sorts of operations. So I'm wondering why it became that way. Was it the ease of using it? Was it the, what was the reason it became so common?
Okay, so in our investigation of this, other agencies that as a matter of general practice would place a material, suspected explosives, in a TCV and transport it to a disposal site, had a nearby disposal site. So the actual land and certification of a site that was safe, that was properly designed and situated, so it could be used as to physically dispose of these of this highly dangerous material existed. So in Los Angeles, in this very highly urban environment, we've made efforts over the last decade to find and identify such a site and have it approved so that the manner of transporting suspected material to that site and safely disposing of it could be done in an open air setting, if you will. That has been a significant challenge. The other counterpoint to that is that we do dispose of materials outside of the TCV, explosives, suspected explosive materials, as part of bomb calls and bomb responses and assessments. There's been instances in which the material is so in such a condition that moving it at all, even into a containment vessel, is beyond a realm of safety. And so a point there is then to destroy it in place. And that's where we shoot it with water cannons, have counter charges, place some bomb blankets and other provisions. I'm not a bomb tech, but just the technical aspect of it is that the material where it's at, it's destroyed in place. It's not placed in a TCV. It's not transported from a scene. Over the last decade, in 41 instances, of course, across the course of a decade, we resorted to using the TCV to do a disposal on site. So it was placed from wherever it was at into that vessel and then destroyed or extinguished there. So it's somewhat of a mobile disposal site, if you will. In our research, we found that probably or likely sprang from a belief of necessity and a balancing act of safety, where the balancing act of removing it from a structure that may be damaged from a blast or pose a risk to surrounding neighborhoods by placing it in a properly designed vessel, which had a capacity for recurring uses where you could detonate 19 pounds of explosives, net explosive weight, on a recurring basis, and then seeing that pattern in history go on over and over and over again, that it was believed that was a safe and effective way of disposing of dangerous materials without unduly placing a risk to surrounding neighborhoods, as well as to our bomb techs. Unfortunately, in this instance, and their estimation and the methodology in which they used to formulate that charge and to dispose of it in that vessel, they had a miscalculation, a significant one, that instead of 16 pounds of net explosive weight, they put 39.8 pounds. And that exceeded the capacity, and that's where we had that failure. Now, fortunately, there were safeguards in place in regards to evacuations, standoff distances, in an effort to protect the public and as well as our personnel. But even with those safeguards in place, we still had 10 of our personnel, including an ATF agent, that were injured, as well as 6 of our community members. And of course, you've seen over $1 million of property damage to the surrounding neighborhood. So with all that, and looking at the practices in other parts of the country, as well as the catastrophic nature of this failure, I made the decision that going forward, if it cannot, if the material is such of a dangerous manner that it cannot be moved at all, then we will destroy it on scene and do whatever is necessary, working with fire, working with our bomb techs to construct a destruction that achieves the safety of everyone involved, but may come at a cost to the surrounding neighborhood in the sense of this of the potential impact. An example of this, and I referenced in an earlier conversation, I was a deputy chief in the San Fernando Valley years ago, where we came across storage of dynamite in a property storage room and in the Van Nuys area off the 405 freeway just south of the Budweiser facility. The dynamite was in such a deteriorated condition, was leaking in such a manner that it was effectively leaking nitroglycerin, as it's described to me, and could not be moved at all without triggering a potential explosion. And a decision was made, rather than try to make that removal, was to set fire to the building and to then put up water cannons and water curtains around that building to limit the damage to the surrounding neighborhood. An extraordinary act, if you will, but one that was necessary because we could not move it without subjecting the bomb techs in the surrounding area to a spontaneous explosion. We will, I believe, in the practice of the last 10 years, was perhaps a means of trying to identify or try to avoid a destruction in place and the collateral damage that may occur to the property. And so a decision was made that we could safely use a containment vessel that had a rating of 19 pounds on a recurring basis. But going forward, we've seen this failure and its aftermath and the emotional impact it's had upon a community and the trust in this department. We will move that material via the TCV or via another means to a disposal site, period. And that is not use this TCV as this mobile destruction. I'm hopeful that my explanation here has given them background on that and that I filled in some of the blanks as to how we got here and why we're going the direction we're going moving forward.
It does. Thank you, Chief. I have other questions, but I'll pass it on if any of my other colleagues want to ask theirs.
Thank you, Joshua, for your question. Our next question will be from Ms. Emily Valdez. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, Chief. I have a question about vaccinations. Are any other vaccinations required to be an LAPD officer or citizen staff member, say tetanus, hepatitis, mumps, measles, and so forth?
I believe so. I understand the tetanus, or not tetanus, but there are other vaccinations. I'll have to get back with you about the actual array. It's been a couple of years since I went through the background process, but the physical and the vaccination, I believe the vaccinations of our officers are part of, and of our personnel are part of that medical clearance. But Emily, I'll have Captain Spell get back with you as to the roster. I don't want to misspeak as to what the exact list of those vaccinations are.
And that would be, my next question would be, would that, if they're required, could that be cross-referenced with the coronavirus vaccine to find out what is if it's a religious exemption, why this particular vaccine? Would that play any role?
I think that's a challenge that all of us as a country, this is a common feature of these mandated vaccination ordinances or laws, is the proviso that there be a medical exemption allowance and a sincerely held religious belief. And as a chief, I'm very interested in how what is the mechanisms, what's the methodology, how's that interpreted, what, as to your point, if it's expressed in this instance of this vaccination, what is the underlying previous vaccination history? How is that relevant if this was the timing of this religious belief is expressed today? How we judge the legitimacy of it? And what I believe is that we should, as a department and as a city, we need to be forthright with our people as to what that methodology looks like and how it's going to be employed as they prepare to file these exemptions. At this point, everyone has filed the 2,600 plus, nearly 3,000 between the two exemptions, have filed a notice to apply for the exemption. I think what is worthwhile next is for us to publish guidelines and how that methodology will be employed, who will evaluate it, and the basis for that evaluation, and then the consequences for a decision by the employee that they're not going to abide by the requirements. I'm speaking with a colleague presently as another chief in another major city here in California, where they're currently, for those that have refused to state their vaccination status, they're currently taking disciplinary action against those individuals. They are still seeking, as many chiefs are, to understand from the city, their own city, what their actions will be against those that refuse to take a vaccination upon their exemption being denied. And so I think we're going to take this a step at a time. And the overhead of all this is to continue to stress to our people to encourage them to look at the science, understand the critical nature of the time that we're in with this pandemic and the challenges it has to all of our public health and safety, and their responsibilities as members of this organization, as well as their own safety and the safety of their family, is for them I'm encouraging them to take the vaccine and get that added protection.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you, Chief. Our next question will be from Mr. Steve Gregory. Go ahead with your question.
Chief, good afternoon. I apologize, I'm joining late. If this question has been answered already, but I wanted to find out if the LAPD has concluded its own investigation into the incident with the TSV, and what is now the current status of all of those involved?
So the department has completed its after action report, which goes into a summary of the events, both what led us to be there, our investigative efforts, our efforts to and actions of removing the explosive material off site, the decision to destroy a portion of those illegal fireworks on site, the aftermath, the recovery effort that's still continuing, and then a critique of the actions across that whole spectrum, lessons learned, things that worked and things that need to be strengthened or expanded regarding protocols and actions and oversight. And then the accountability loop now is what's next. Those two reports, the ATF final report, the department's after action report, will now form the basis for the complaint investigation against the actions of those that were involved in this action, and which will include their ability to respond and answer questions and provide their own account of their actions and rationale and justification. And then the decision will be made and whether or not misconduct was sustained or did occur by the preponderance of the evidence. And if such, and that does occur, then what is the appropriate penalty or discipline, which is a decision that it rests with me. I will not prejudge that beyond what I've already described as far as my belief of what happened there based on the factual evidence that we've gathered with these two investigations. But I will wait seeing the officers' responses and allow this due process to continue. And I was estimated that I see that hopefully that we'll bring this to a full closure within 60 to 75 days. And as to the duty status of those that are directly involved, they remain off of the bomb squad. They have not returned to their previous assignment of working in the field, and nor do I expect that they will.
Chief, has this experience sort of changed any other aspect of your department in the way you operate? Has this really been a wake-up call in other areas of how you operate?
I won't call it a wake-up call, but I think that it goes to speak to one other aspect of this. Certainly the bomb protocols, when we looked back at the details of what the standard operating guidance were, what was the documentation, what was our process of going through the evaluation, the assessment, if you will, of suspected explosive material, and the decision-making process in which to destroy it, whether it be at where it's found in a total containment vessel or off-site. We were concerned about the lack of detail and the structure of it, and that it needed to be strengthened significantly. And this report and our after-action report goes into a number of those areas. The other area that we saw a weakness is in the documentation of evacuations. The department conducts emergency evacuations regarding situations in neighborhoods, sometimes in businesses, relative to some type of local emergency. That might be a bomb, it might be an active shooter, or some other threat to public safety. And in that evacuation, essentially in the city of Los Angeles, you have a voluntary evacuation, which people are put on notice, and they're asked to voluntarily consider because of the risks at hand for them to self-evacuate. And another one is a mandatory evacuation, which in this instance is what this was. When we look back at this, I'm not satisfied that we had the level of documentation that we should have had or could have had. And this has brought a keen focus to us looking at those protocols and actually expanding the current documentation standard for not just who we contacted, but what were their actions. Did they decide or express a desire to shelter in place? Was there no answer at the door? Or did they evacuate and leave the area? I'm not satisfied that in this instance, the management of this event had enough clarity about exactly along that street and in that surrounding area with fine granularity, the status of that evacuation. We do know that this was an evacuation that took place over hours. It wasn't just one single evacuation effort. The initial evacuation was of very few homes. And then it expanded over the course of the hours that followed when we found more explosives and we found more dangerous the dangerousness of these homemade explosives. But even then, towards the 11th hour, when it was close to the detonation of the suspected material, we had yet another wave of efforts of safeguarding, including members of the media, that had drawn closer and closer to the site to admonish them to move back and to move away from it. So this was a dynamic scene. It was one that I do believe that our efforts were to safeguard all the public around there. But this is, and as we look at this, what I take from it, to your point, what other lessons learned is our documentation on the level of an extent of our evacuation efforts.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chief. Now, does anyone have any questions for the chief before we conclude?
It's Stephanie. I will always have additional questions if we have a moment. Reading the report, when the line that says that there's no formal training for TCV operation, how does that happen?
That's a great question. This one of the recommendations is that has to be changed. In our discussions with the ATF and the FBI, as you see detailed in there, the extensive training that goes on there is the TCV. The use of that equipment is handled in the most passing of sense, the most very basic, not a detailed or what I would think step-by-step basis. And that has to change. And certainly we're changing it here, but we also look to impact the industry with this by calling out that TCV is seen as a piece of equipment that manufacturers create, and they create the documentation or they create the articulation of what its capacities are. And then they kind of put it out for you to purchase as a tool, much as you would a half-ton truck, and then go out and use it in a responsible way. And the people who teach the destruction or the dealing with explosives, the ATF and FBI, by our determination at this point, reference that device, but don't go into a great deal of detail about how to ensure the safety and the determination of the methodology of what you're putting in that item, and the caution as to what could happen if you miscalculate. And whether calculations should be allowed on an estimated basis, as it was done, and we believe this instance, visually estimated versus physically weighing, and so that you avoid this overload that occurred. There have been instances in Los Angeles police history that has changed the course of this department forever. This is going to be one of them. But I also looked and am absolutely committed to ensure that our colleagues in other major cities and the policing as a profession also benefits from lessons learned by LAPD. We believe walking into this event on June 30th, because of our interactions with other people who are involved in explosives, in the sense of the investigation and the remedying of, remedying these safe and resolving these in a safe manner, that we had a premier unit. What we saw in this event, the question that when I look at this, will not judge yet the actions of those officers, other than we know, believe firmly by the preponderance of evidence that they made mistakes, miscalculated, and that was aided by a lack of, in my view, sufficient standards, protocols, and rigidity as to what the methodology should be, and oversight and double checking and safety measures to ensure that this type of error would not occur. We've seen this happen in other industries, and unfortunately, it's happened here with us. But we're committed to moving forward with this in a manner. And I think these 13 specific actions that we identify in this report go a long way to do that. However, we now are inviting the FBI in the next step of this rehabilitation, if you will. They'll now come in with the completion of these 2 reports and the rewriting of our special operation, our standard operating guidelines. And they're going to do a top to bottom review and provide further insight as to whether there's any additional measures that need to be taken to ensure that we have the very best practices and the confidence in our operation for the safety of our personnel, as well as the communities in which we serve.
Thank you, Stephanie, for your question. Chief, any final thoughts before we conclude?
No, I thank you all, and appreciate the opportunity to talk today.
Thank
All
you,
the best.
Chief. Have a great day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a great day.